I know some people who set out to do big things and have accomplished them. I have never particularly set out to do a big thing. So I would think that, I would hope that would be my own personal philosophy, that you do the little things, the big things either take care of themselves or you never get to them, but at least you go. So I think that's a very sound way to do it.
Whenever I hear the name John Reid, or whenever I think of John, there are two words that automatically come to mind. They are gentle man. John Reid is the quintessential gentleman in every sense of the word.
Well, first I would describe John as more than the moral compass of the barristers. I think he's the gyroscope of the barristers and the compass. You know, you can be flying in an appropriate compass direction, east versus west, but you might be flying upside down.
He's incredible, bright, intelligent, good sense of humor. He's organized, he handles things very well. He's fair to everybody, just a super top-notch individual.
I do believe there are those among us, not very many, who have large vision and large thoughts and step into things and make them happen and lead us, and we're eternally grateful. But most of us just have a certain set of skills and you do them the best you know how in what comes to hand to do, and it moves along, and if you do it well, maybe you get a chance to do a little bigger version of it a little later, and so I guess you call it philosophy. My view is anyway that one needs to proceed that way to do what's at hand.
He has taught evidence to prospective lawyers in each decade since the 1940s. I don't know that anybody else can match that record.
We couldn't have asked for a better, finer, more wonderful executive director. We got one of the greats, and he took the matter by the horns, and he inspires us each and every year to go back home and believe what we're doing and be proud of our profession. And we certainly therefore are most proud of him.
I know it's kind of hokey to say, but I do believe that service is the important thing that we've formed. So I think that if one approaches what he's doing as service, or as I said, you're addicted to it, then that's the way to go, and over time it pans out. Well, I was an only child in a musical family. My father was a violinist and a singer and a choir director, and my mother was a pianist. And I played the violin from a very early stage and played it well enough to play in the Cornell Symphony. My father earned his way through college playing the violin, playing concerts in the days before records and radio, and people would pay to hear a pretty good artist. And so he was playing in small towns around where the college was. And so he wanted me to play, and I began when I was 6, and by the time I was about 9, I played pretty well. So we did a lot of things together. And I'm reminded of a time when I was playing the violin as a very young child, and people were being so complimentary. And my father didn't want me to get my self-esteem too high. And he said, you remember, these people are our friends, and they're going to say nice things about you. And besides, most of them don't know anything about music. And so I'm told that the next time somebody complimented me, I said, do you know anything about music? By the time I was in college, there was a radio station in Kansas City where we lived that my father had some connection with. I don't now know how it happened. And then we had a 15-minute program with a pianist whom he knew, who was a superb pianist. And we had 2 violin and piano music for 15 minutes once a week for a season. I don't remember how long it lasted. I began teaching at the University of Oklahoma in 1946 and was on the faculty there for 3 years, but the 3rd year was on leave for graduate work at Columbia Law School. And while I was there, Michigan offered me a position here in Ann Arbor, and I accepted, and so I came to Michigan in 1949. I was a tax teacher to begin with, as well as evidence and a few other things. And I think it was 1953, there was a major overhaul of the Internal Revenue Code. And the lawyers in Flint, Michigan had an organization that met whatever their local bar was. And they decided that the lawyers of Flint ought to be walked through the new Internal Revenue Code. And I was a tax teacher here at Michigan. And so I went up there and spent every Saturday for maybe 6 weeks taking them through the new Internal Revenue Code. And I very much enjoyed being with them and visiting with them and so on. And I guess I became a little visible, and so I was asked to speak on some other subjects, other places. And first thing you know, I was sort of an outside person for the University of Michigan Law School, where I was doing more of the interacting with the practicing bar than almost any of my other colleagues on the faculty. And obviously, as I began to teach more and more in the field of litigation subjects, I began to do that. And the law school had originated what it called an advocacy institute that was different from the one we had later as hands-on trial work. But in any event, I was asked to speak at some of those because I was teaching evidence and civil procedure at that time. And just one thing led to another, and I think I probably told a few jokes, and they liked that, and so I kept being asked to speak at various things, and one thing led to another, and then I became a dean at Colorado, and the deans are always asked to speak some, and Jim Kerrigan had me speak at the barristers meeting, and that led to the barristers connection, and from that, the rest of that's history.
I'm reminded about lots of times we'd go to these annual meetings and hear some notable experts on a lot of subjects at the convention. And we'd say, gosh, how can we have a better program than this? And usually John Reed would cap it off. He'd be the last one to speak. And I don't remember a single time when, after John spoke, we said, well, we heard some good speakers today, but none of them could compare with John.
My first acquaintance with the barristers was when I was invited to be a speaker at one of their annual conventions at Ceramar Beach in Puerto Rico. I had not heard of the group before, but their administrator at that time was Jim Kerrigan, whom I had known from my days on the Colorado Law faculty. He was serving as their administrator, and he apparently gave my name to the program chair and asked me to, they asked me to speak there, and so I became acquainted with the organization at that point. I knew the people who were the founders of the barristers. There were 4 names that are frequently mentioned as the founders, which were John Allen Appleman, a fellow named John Gordon Guerin, Craig Spangenberg, and Murray Sams. Craig and Murray were the first 2 presidents of the group. And I had conducted, had been the manager of some advocacy institutes at the University of Michigan over the years, and 3 of those, the 3 other than John Guerin, had been participants in those meetings, in those sessions, and I knew them as outstanding trial lawyers, and they were the ones who put together the organization in the beginning. So I knew of them, but I was not a member of that group, and of course was not a member of any of the other trial lawyers groups. I was not a trial lawyer. I was a tax lawyer as a young lawyer, and then became a teacher of taxation and gradually moved into the litigation subjects. but never, and to this day, have never tried a case in the courtroom. My recollection was that it was an absolutely delightful group of people. One of the, I learned later, one of the precepts of the organization that you don't come to the meeting to talk about your cases. The only ones you can talk about are the ones you lost, and therefore nobody talks about them very much. The spouses are involved, and it's in the military you call it R&R, you know, for rest and rehabilitation or whatever the word is, for busy trial lawyers to come together and to try to remember why it was they became trial lawyers in the first place, and to refresh their notion of their ideals about the profession. And so there was that atmosphere that permeated the meeting, with the visiting outside the formal sessions being very much a part of the meeting, as much as the lectures that were there. And also interesting to find out how people were interested in one another and in their families. So to this day, you hear conversation about how is your son doing, or what's happening here, and people know it's an extended family, and there was that feeling right from the first.
I can fondly recall recently in Scottsdale, my wife and I and one of John's daughters and John, at the age of 90, took a hot air balloon ride. Prior to dawn, we have this wonderful visual of John peeking out of a hot air balloon basket laying on the ground, and the propane flames warming up the balloon. That's the John Reed I know and love. He's an adventurous spirit. When we're up in the air, we're moving toward some power lines, and I'm about to say, "You idiot, we're approaching power lines," when John says instead, in his utterly John Reed way, "Oh good, I'll quickly be able to recharge my cell phone."
He's got a great sense of humor, and I recall that one time talked about a guy with a great ego, fantastic ego, but he said, you know, the guy never lived up to his expectations. He had a lot of quips like that were fantastic, that are fantastic.
When he came to visit us in California with Dot one year, stayed with us for a bit, and I took him up to the Point Arena, California lighthouse, which is out on a narrow spit of land into the Pacific. Quite a tall lighthouse, and we went through the museum, and it's on steep cliffs on every side, not very wide and steep cliffs. And all of a sudden, John disappeared, and I said, "Oh, shucks." I didn't say shucks. He's gone over the cliff. And the next thing I hear is from the top of the lighthouse, which required walking up probably 150 stairs, a voice yelling, "Mike, I'm up here." He was only about
Wonderful.
82 or 3 at the time.
We have three. We had 5, lost 2 boys, have 3 girls. I had a daughter who's a paralegal, had a son who went to law school but did not become a lawyer. He was a city planner. So nobody really went for the law side at all. I didn't have any desires for the children. I want to do what they felt they would like to do and could do. 2 of the daughters are teachers in public school systems. One's a school psychologist, and they had the son Randy, who was city planner, a zoning type, and so on, and a son who died when he was 17 in an electrical accident, so he never chose. He was thinking about becoming an architect.
In 1980, Doug Bragg advises that he was resigning as executive secretary. And we had a meeting in Colorado Springs. Stan Siegel was the president, and John Reed was already serving as the editor of the Barrister Quarterly. And so I said, "Why not John Reed?" And they unanimously responded to that, and we hired John, which is the most significant and the most important thing, in my opinion, that the barristers have ever done.
I looked in the records and I found that the first two conventions of the group had separate activities for the women, spouses' tours to go off to do something else. At the third convention, and the one that I spoke at first was maybe the 12th or 14th or something, third convention, they dropped that and they never again had separate activities for the spouses. They were always in the sessions living, and when I was there, they were all involved. I remember we had a session in Marco Island, Florida, and a speaker from Miami was talking about jury selection, a kind of subject matter that we don't normally have on the program. And he had all the old stereotypes that I heard about when I was in school back in the end of the 30s, which was how you, if you're a plaintiff's lawyer, you don't want an accountant on the jury because he will not be willing to give large damages, and you want this kind, that kind. And he made some dismissive comment about how you would deal with women on the jury. When do you want women? And it was really very sexist. And Dot and one of the other wives, I've forgotten whom, in the back rooms, started the hissing going, and so the group hissed him down. So it's always been a participation of the women who wanted to be heard when the time came.
One of the fundamental principles of the barristers is the concept that our spouses, our wives, are given equal credit with the fellow. They are considered and included in everything we do. John Reed epitomizes that principle. Wherever John goes, Dot goes. Whatever he does, Dot is with him. His devotion to this woman is a tremendous example to each one of us.
I would select to play John Reed, Roy Rogers, because Roy saved every program at the end. And that's kind of what John does with our programs. He rides in at the end, and regardless of what's gone on before him, he saves every program. Secondly, Roy had Dale Evans, and John has Dot Reed as a companion. Third, there were always sidekicks, bumbling sidekicks that Roy Rogers had. And John always has a bumbling sidekick, which is the new president.
John Shepard of St. Louis was one of the more memorable members. John had great instinct. He was trying a case in the courthouse in St. Louis where it was an old building where the elevator shaft was an open cage, as we've seen in old movies. The elevator itself was a cage operated by an older black woman, African-American woman with white gloves. They were very slow elevator. And lunch break came. The case was to resume at 1:30. The jury came in, the judge came in, not noticing that not all counsel were at the table. And sure enough, they were ready to go, and no John Shepard. At about this point, John appeared at the door of the courtroom, immediately sized up the room, and instead of, as most of us would have started apologizing in a general way, he said, "Oh, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in your honor, my deep apologies. I missed the 1:30 elevator," which brought the house down. And of course, everybody understood that possibility, and so it was fun. So these were the kinds of lawyers. Murray Sams was that kind of lawyer. I think not Craig. Craig wouldn't have quipped that way, but Murray Sams had these cute responses, which are probably not common in the trial bar anymore, maybe because of self-selection, but also because court rules have developed such that the judges don't give as much leeway to judges in the courtroom as they did at an earlier time. So in many ways, I miss some of that. The American Bar Association Journal recently had a list of what it called lions of the trial bar, and of the 6 who are listed, 3 of them are barristers: Racehorse Haynes, Joe Jamail, Bobby Lee Cook, maybe one other, Jim Brosnahan of San Francisco. when you have a figurative memorial, such as a statue of a person, of a prototype of a soldier or whatever it might be, you have a single kind of concept of what that was all about. The names of people evoke a whole range of recollections and of meanings and of emotional resonance to who they were and what they stood for and what they did and so on. And I had the feeling that was true of our people. And I find that when I read those names, particularly the names of the fellows whom I've gotten to know, it's hard not to get choked up, because indeed the name does evoke the feeling of affection and nostalgia and recollection, all that you had for those people, and you visualize them all over. So names are very important, and doing that in this way, I think, has been a good way to honor those whom we've lost. I think immediately of Doug Hillman. I remember kind of choking up over that one. He was a dear friend. Dot and I spent our 4th of July weekends at their lakeside home for a number of years in a row, frequently watching the Wimbledon matches in their home. They were tennis players and did that. Bill Fleischkamp had been my student here at Michigan, and his death was a real loss. So there are those for whom I had a particularly personal relationship of some sort. And then there were others whom I had gotten to know for whatever reason, just a little better than some of the rest. Ray Pearson, Tom Alexander recently, others through the years. I hesitate to mention any for omitting some others, but in fact, a number of them. Some of the fellows, honestly, I never really got to know. They didn't come to meetings, and they were just names to me. But there have been a few where I consider them not just acquaintances, but friends, and those are a little harder. The phrase, the term that always comes to my mind is that it's like extended family. That we know about, mentioned earlier, knowing about their children, what they're doing, and haven't seen you since last time, has so-and-so graduated from college yet, and has this marriage taken place? So there's a real sense that around the periphery of the thing, I wouldn't say it's the heart of it, but around the periphery is this kind of encompassing concern for one another. And I know, partly because of the way we're chosen, to be sure that there's a congeniality. These are not people that take themselves too seriously. There are a few sneak in, but not many. That they are delightful people to be with. They were chosen that way, and as a consequence, I find it that there's no group that I enjoy being with more than this group. Just the idea of going to be with them is like a vacation almost. I'm going to go now and have fun with these people whom I like, and I hear interesting things, and we get in conversations, and I hear about things around the country that I didn't know were going on, and aspects of life and law that I hadn't heard about, and I do hear some war stories. People do occasionally tell good war stories. And when I was teaching, they were